Xiomara was 79 when she stopped answering her morning calls. For nearly a decade, every day at 7:30 a.m., her daughter Layla would phone just to hear her mother's voice. It was their ritual, their quiet tether across states. But on this Tuesday morning, the line rang endlessly. Layla told herself it was nothing. Maybe mom had stepped into the garden or left her phone in the other room. But a quiet unease settled in her chest, the kind that doesn't go away just because you want it to. When they found Xiomara, she was sitting by the kitchen window, her cup of tea untouched. She smiled, but her eyes didn't quite follow the words. "What day is it again?" she asked. There was no emergency, no collapse, no visible pain, just a slow fading. At first, everyone brushed it off as normal aging. We've all done it, haven't we? Said things like, "She's just tired," or "He's just having a slow day." But I've learned over the years that the body and mind whisper long before they scream. And if we know how to listen, really listen, we can change the story. I've sat across from hundreds of patients like Xiomara, proud, independent, quietly slipping away. The danger is rarely loud. It doesn't always look like a heart attack or a fall. Sometimes it's a skipped lunch, a slower walk, a forgotten birthday. Sometimes it's the moment someone who used to light up a room starts sitting a little longer in silence. And it breaks my heart, not just because of the illness, but because most of it could have been seen coming. Most of it could have been softened, slowed, maybe even prevented. Xiomara's journey wasn't a single diagnosis. It was 5 quiet threats woven together: a tired heart, a mind losing names, balance faltering on the stairs, a cough that lingered too long, and a silence that stretched between phone calls. Each on its own might seem small, but together they were stealing her life by inches. Not suddenly, but silently. That's what we so often miss. After 75, it's not one big thing. It's a series of moments we ignore until they become irreversible. But here's the part that matters most. It's not too late. Xiomara's family made changes. They didn't wait for a crisis. They added simple, heart-healthy meals to her day. Encouraged her to walk, just a little, every afternoon. Brought over puzzles and books. They set up a weekly lunch with neighbors, even when Xiomara said she wasn't in the mood. They made small, gentle choices that slowly brought her back to herself. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough to laugh again, enough to remember what joy feels like, enough to give her time. And that's why we're here today. Not to fear aging, but to understand it, to recognize the signs before they turn into sorrow, to know what really threatens us after 75. And more importantly, what we can do to protect the ones we love. Because it's never just about adding more years. It's about making sure those years are filled with comfort, clarity, connection, and the dignity every life deserves. Xiomara used to walk every afternoon, just as the sun softened over the back fence. She didn't go far, just around the block, past the bakery where Mr. Leem still whistled while he kneaded dough, then by the small church with the blue doors, and home again. It was her way of keeping rhythm, of reminding herself that she was still here, still steady. But one day, the walk ended early. She came home after only 5 minutes, breath short, a strange flutter in her chest. She sat by the window, holding her wrist as if trying to feel something slip away. When Layla asked how she was, Xiomara smiled. "Just a little tired today," she said. But Layla noticed the walk stopped altogether after that. No more visits to the bakery, no more lazy waves at neighbors. It was so subtle it almost went unnoticed, until her shoes, once kept by the front door, stayed tucked away in the closet. At first, the family thought maybe she just didn't feel like going out, but deep down, something felt different. Her breath had grown shorter, her naps longer. There was a weight in her steps and in her silence. I remember when Layla called me. "Is this just aging?" she asked, her voice tight. "Or is something wrong?" I've heard that question hundreds of times. And here's what I told her gently. Fatigue that steals the little joys, the walks, the gardening, the conversations, isn't just age. It's often the heart trying to speak. After 75, the heart doesn't always scream for help. It whispers, in shorter walks, in skipped chores, in a quiet heaviness you can't quite name. We brought Xiomara in for a checkup. Her blood pressure was higher than usual, her cholesterol too. She hadn't mentioned chest pain and she didn't complain of palpitations. But the tiredness had a pattern. Her heart was working too hard and losing strength slowly. I could see the fear in her eyes when I told her. She wasn't scared of illness, but of losing her independence. Her walks weren't exercise, they were freedom. So we took small steps. I helped her start a new rhythm, not with miles, but with movement. We added fiber-rich oats to her breakfast. Just a small change, but one that helps lower cholesterol. Layla stocked the fridge with berries and leafy greens. I encouraged her to stretch by the window every morning, to raise her arms to the sky and breathe like she was welcoming the day. No lectures, no pressure, just kindness and attention. The walk returned, slowly, first to the mailbox, then to the corner. One week, I got a photo from Layla, Xiomara in her blue cardigan, standing by the church again. Her smile didn't just show pride, it showed life. The truth is, many seniors don't collapse from sudden heart attacks. They fade quietly from slow, unnoticed decline, but the body often gives us a chance to listen before it gives up. And Xiomara's walk, her absence from the sidewalk, was her first cry for help. That's how healing begins. Not in big diagnoses, but in small awareness, in knowing that tiredness isn't always about sleep. That skipping a walk might be more than a mood. Xiomara didn't need a gym, she needed someone to notice, someone to say, "You used to love your walks, what changed?" That one question may have saved her heart and her days. Xiomara had never missed a birthday, not once. She kept them all in a little spiral notebook on her kitchen counter. The pages were filled with names and dates, some underlined in pink, others marked with stars. Her grandson Milo's birthday had a big red heart next to it. He was turning 10 this year, and for weeks she had talked about the cake she'd bake, the card she was writing by hand, and the blue sweater she had picked out herself. But on the morning of his birthday, Xiomara didn't call. She didn't show up. She didn't even remember. When Layla reminded her later that day, Xiomara's face changed, not with confusion, but shame. She covered her mouth with her hand, whispering, "How could I forget Milo?" Her voice cracked like something inside had split open. It wasn't just a forgotten date, it was the beginning of something deeper, something she couldn't quite explain. "I've just been scattered lately," she said. "I thought it was Monday today." That moment marked a shift, not just in Xiomara's memory, but in the way her family saw her. Little things they'd brushed off before suddenly felt heavier. She had asked the same question twice the other day. She misplaced her reading glasses and later found them in the refrigerator. She started repeating stories, looping back into the same memory as if afraid it might disappear if she let go too soon. I sat with her gently during her next visit. "Have you noticed the forgetting?" I asked, not accusing, just wondering with her. She nodded. "Sometimes I walk into a room and forget why. Sometimes I don't feel like myself." That's what struck me, the quiet sadness in her eyes. Not fear, not confusion, but grief, like something sacred was slipping through her fingers. We ran a few simple cognitive tests. It wasn't a diagnosis yet, but the patterns were there. Early memory loss, a fog beginning to settle in the mind. I told Layla what I've told many others. Dementia doesn't always begin with forgetting names. It starts in the moments that feel like nothing at all. Losing track of time, avoiding conversations, feeling distant in your own body. But again, there's power in catching it early. There's no cure, not yet. But there are defenses, small, daily things that make a difference. So we started gently challenging her mind. Milo brought over puzzles, and they worked on them together after school. Layla made sure they cooked new recipes once a week, meals that required measuring, reading, tasting. Xiomara even began journaling again, just a few sentences a day. Thoughts, memories, things that made her laugh. I also encouraged one simple addition to her diet, walnuts. Just a handful a day. They're not magic, but they support brain health with their omega-3s and antioxidants. Xiomara liked them roasted with cinnamon, just like her mother used to make. It wasn't about fixing anything overnight, it was about reminding her brain, "I'm still needed." The birthday she forgot became the day her family remembered to pay closer attention, not out of panic, but out of love. The mind doesn't vanish all at once, it drifts. But with kindness, with connection, and a little care, we can build gentle bridges back to ourselves. It was a Tuesday morning when Xiomara fell. There was no dramatic crash, no broken bones, just a soft thud and the sound of her teacup tipping onto the floor. She had been reaching for the top shelf to grab a jar of honey, something she'd done 100 times before. But this time, she lost her balance. Her foot twisted just enough to give way. She didn't tell anyone that day. She brushed herself off, wiped the spill, and sat quietly at the table. her heart pounding louder than the pain in her ankle. When Layla stopped by later that afternoon, she noticed Xiomara walking more slowly. "Just a little stiff," Xiomara said with a weak smile. But the limp lingered. The next morning, she skipped breakfast, said she wasn't hungry. The day after, she stayed in bed longer than usual. By the end of the week, she had declined a walk, a phone call, and an invitation to church. The fall had taken more than her footing, it had taken her confidence. I've seen this happen more times than I can count. The fall is never just about the floor, it's about what happens after, the fear it plants, the quiet shame, the way someone who once moved freely begins to question every step. Falls change people, not because of injury, but because they whisper something devastating. You're not safe in your own body anymore. When Xiomara finally told me, it was almost in a whisper. "I just lost my footing," she said, eyes down. "I don't know what happened." But I knew, weakening leg muscles, subtle shifts in balance, maybe even a bit of dizziness from her blood pressure meds. It didn't take much, and it rarely does after 75. We looked around her house together. The rug by the sink was loose, the bathroom light was dim, her slippers, though cozy, had no grip on the soles. I told her gently, "You didn't fail, the environment did." Layla installed grab bars in the bathroom that weekend. A friend from church gifted her a motion-activated nightlight. It wasn't about making her home perfect, just safer. But what helped most wasn't physical, it was emotional. Layla encouraged her to join a local Tai Chi group, gentle movements, slow balance work, nothing too intense. At first, Xiomara resisted. "I'll look silly," she said, but she went. Once, then again, and again. The laughter in that little community center, the shared stumbles and claps when someone nailed a pose, it reminded her that she wasn't the only one trying to stay upright. We also reviewed her medication list and found one that caused occasional dizziness. Her doctor adjusted it slightly, and Xiomara felt the difference within days. She started walking around the house more, humming to herself again. It wasn't about going back to who she was before the fall. It was about believing she could keep moving forward. Because here's the truth, falls after 75 aren't random. They're rarely just accidents. They're warning signs. And more than that, they're emotional earthquakes. But with awareness, with small changes, and with love that shows up in handrails, better lighting, and quiet encouragement, we can help someone stand tall again. Xiomara had always had a soft cough in the mornings, just a clearing of the throat, nothing unusual. But one day, the sound changed. It was deeper, heavier, and it lingered longer than usual. She waved it off as the weather or too much dust, but Layla noticed the way her mother's shoulders drooped when she coughed, how she took deeper breaths afterward as if trying to catch something that kept slipping away. The cough became part of the room, echoing off the kitchen walls and weaving itself into the silence between conversations. She didn't have a fever, not at first, no chills, no sore throat, just that persistent little rattle in her chest. Then one night, Layla called and Xiomara didn't pick up. When she arrived the next morning, she found her mother sitting on the couch, pale, slightly confused, and short of breath. "I didn't want to make a fuss," Xiomara whispered. "It's just a cold, sweetheart." But it wasn't. A chest x-ray confirmed it. Pneumonia. A silent storm had been brewing in her lungs for days, and no one saw it coming. Xiomara had always been strong, and in many ways she still was. But the body changes after 75. The lungs lose elasticity, the immune system slows. A simple virus that a younger person would shake off in 2 days can spiral into something life-threatening. She spent 3 days in the hospital, not in critical condition, but close enough to scare everyone. I visited her there, sat beside her bed, and we talked about how it all started. "I didn't want to bother anyone," she said again. "That's what stuck with me. Not the illness, but the silence. The belief that staying quiet was somehow noble, that not wanting to be a burden was more important than being safe." After she recovered, we made small but vital changes. Layla helped set reminders for her flu and pneumonia vaccines. We placed a humidifier in her bedroom to ease her breathing at night. I showed her a simple breathing technique, deep inhale, slow exhale through pursed lips, to keep her lungs moving even when she was still. But most importantly, we changed the conversation. In her world, asking for help had always been something you did only when it was serious. But now we reframed what serious meant: a cough that lingers, a low-grade fever, a sudden wave of fatigue. These weren't inconveniences. They were messages from her body asking not to be ignored. Xiomara started keeping a small health notebook by her bedside, just a line or two each day. Woke up wheezing a bit. Cough was less today. Felt tired after breakfast. It gave her a voice in her own care, and it gave Layla a way to spot changes before they grew into danger. Prevention at this stage of life isn't just about medicine. It's about listening and being listened to, because sometimes the most dangerous illnesses aren't the ones that arrive loudly. They're the ones that creep in slowly, wrapped in everyday symptoms. And sometimes the greatest medicine is the quiet permission to say, something doesn't feel right, and know someone will answer. After the hospital stay, Xiomara recovered well, physically. Her cough faded, her appetite returned, and her steps regained some steadiness. But something else didn't come back, her voice. Not her literal voice, she could speak just fine. But the sound of her initiating conversation, the small hums she used to make while folding laundry, the gentle way she used to say, "Good morning," before anyone else had opened their eyes, that voice went quiet. She answered when spoken to, but didn't reach out first. She smiled, but the smile stopped at her lips. Her home, once filled with warmth and little rituals, had grown still. Layla noticed it one Sunday afternoon. She brought Milo over with a new puzzle. Xiomara joined them at the table, but she didn't place a single piece. She just watched. When Layla asked her something, anything, she replied with short answers. "I'm fine, just tired, don't worry." But the words felt like curtains drawn tight. That's when Layla asked me, "Is this depression?" And I told her gently, "It might be. Or it might be loneliness, which wears the same face." Loneliness is deceptive. It doesn't always look like sadness. Sometimes it looks like silence, or skipped meals, or long hours spent staring out the window at nothing at all. Xiomara's world had gotten smaller. Her closest friends had either moved away or passed on. Her church group had stopped meeting during the pandemic and never truly started back up. Her neighbors were younger now, busy with jobs and children. She didn't want to bother anyone, and in that quiet, a slow erosion had begun. Of spirit, of curiosity, of joy. Here's what most people don't realize. Loneliness isn't just emotional. It's physical. It raises blood pressure, weakens the immune system. It even accelerates memory decline. The heart isn't meant to beat in isolation, and neither is the soul. So we took a different kind of step. Not medical, not nutritional, relational. I asked Xiomara who she missed. She said her old neighbor, Ms. Dolores. So Layla found her number. They hadn't spoken in 3 years, but Dolores picked up on the first ring. They talked for 43 minutes that day. Xiomara cried afterward, not out of sadness, but release. "I didn't know how much I needed to hear her voice," she whispered. After that, we made small efforts. One call a week, a shared lunch with an old friend, even just sitting on a park bench where people passed by. Milo began calling her every Thursday after school to tell her something silly about his day. She started writing postcards again, little notes to people she used to love seeing. Slowly, the silence retreated. One morning, Xiomara called Layla first just to say hello. That alone was enough to bring tears to her daughter's eyes. Not because it was dramatic, but because it meant she still wanted to reach out. That's what we forget sometimes. Connection is a kind of medicine. Not flashy, not fast, but deep. And for people like Xiomara, it can mean the difference between fading quietly and living fully. We age differently when we feel seen. We heal differently when we feel loved. It had been nearly a year since Xiomara forgot Milo's birthday, since she stopped walking, since that cough landed her in a hospital bed and the silence settled into her home like a second shadow. But now, something had shifted again, this time in the other direction. It was a quiet morning, the kind she used to love. A little fog on the window, the smell of cinnamon and coffee in the air. She stood in front of the mirror, brushing her silver hair back behind her ears. And for the first time in a long while, she smiled, not just with her mouth, but with her eyes. It wasn't a big moment. It wasn't about appearance. It was recognition, as if she finally saw herself again. She called Layla later that day. "I want to make soup," she said, "the kind your father used to like." It might seem small, but for Xiomara, this wasn't about soup. It was about memory, about reclaiming something she thought had slipped away. She had been journaling almost every night. Some pages were lists of what she ate. Others were tiny stories. Today I remembered the scent of mango trees, she wrote once, and another, I laughed out loud at a squirrel falling from a branch. She had taken back little pieces of herself, one by one, not by reversing time or illness, but by noticing, by caring, by allowing herself to feel joy without guilt and slowness without shame. She no longer saw tiredness as a flaw. She no longer feared asking for help. In fact, she began offering it, calling a friend who had just lost her husband, sending Milo voice notes of encouragement before school. The truth is, aging had once felt like a quiet vanishing, but now it felt like something else, a sacred unfolding. She wasn't becoming less, she was becoming clearer, softer in some places, stronger in others. She could still forget things, she still got dizzy sometimes, but her days weren't ruled by fear anymore, they were ruled by presence. And presence is what she gave her family most. When Milo won his science fair, she was there, card in hand, eyes bright. When Layla cried from a hard week at work, Xiomara held her hand the way she had when Layla was 5. And sometimes, in the middle of dinner, she would pause and say, "I'm really here right now." That was her way of saying thank you. Thank you for seeing me when I started to disappear. Thank you for walking me back to myself. Her story doesn't end in a miracle. She didn't outrun time or illness, but she did something just as powerful. She lived, fully, honestly, with dignity. And maybe that's the real victory after 75. Not avoiding every risk, but facing them with love and attention. Not clinging to who we used to be, but embracing who we still are. Because the final chapters of life are not meant to be written in fear. They are meant to be written in light, in the laughter of a grandchild, in the aroma of homemade soup, in the quiet strength of waking up and saying, "I'm still here." Xiomara is still here, and maybe, in some way, so are all of us. It was a Tuesday evening when Xiomara did something she hadn't done in months. She set the table for 2. She folded the napkins the way her mother once showed her, diagonally, tucked just under the spoon. She lit a small candle, even though the sun hadn't set yet, and she placed a single mango in the center of the table. Not as food, just as memory. Mangoes reminded her of her childhood, of long summer days and laughter echoing through a crowded kitchen. For years, she had stopped noticing these things. But now the small details called to her again, like a quiet invitation to rejoin the living. That night, she made a simple soup. Carrots, lentils, turmeric, garlic, the same kind her husband used to love. Layla came over after work and found her mother humming softly as the pot simmered. "It smells like home in here," she said, and Xiomara smiled, not a tired smile, not one of politeness, but a real one, like something had finally warmed from within. And in that moment, I thought about how healing doesn't always come in hospital rooms or with prescriptions. Sometimes it starts at a kitchen table, in a quiet room, with a recipe remembered, with a story told again, this time with more laughter than pain. Because in the end, the body may grow older, but the spirit, it waits patiently for us to return to it. Xiomara had faced each of the 5 silent threats, her tired heart, her wandering memory, a hidden fall, a dangerous infection, and the aching loneliness that had nearly taken her voice. She hadn't conquered them, but she had acknowledged them, responded to them, and made room for love in the spaces they once filled. And that's what saved her. Not medicine alone, but meaning. Not perfection, but presence. Now, every Sunday, Xiomara writes a single sentence in her journal. "Today is a good day to be alive." And when I read those words, I don't see an elderly woman battling decline. I see a woman who chose to live, even as the years stretched further behind her. A woman who reminded all of us that the last chapters can still be full of warmth, laughter, connection, and mangoes. Xiomara didn't turn her life around overnight. There was no dramatic cure, no magic moment where everything became perfect again. But what did change, what truly transformed, was how she responded to the quiet signs. When her heart grew tired, she didn't ignore it. When her memory started to slip, she allowed her family to step in. And when the silence began to swallow her days, she reached for connection instead of hiding in it. She went from a woman who brushed off her symptoms, who whispered, "I'm fine," when she wasn't, to someone who could sit with her daughter, sip soup slowly, and say with quiet pride, "Today, I feel like myself." That is no small victory. That is grace. That is healing. And now I ask you, gently, with all the love in the world, to look around. Look at your parents, your grandparents, your partner, even yourself. Have you noticed a change that felt too small to name? A tired walk, a repeated question, a lost interest in something once loved? Don't wait for the fall. Don't wait for the silence. Begin with a question. Begin with care, because we cannot stop time. But we can change how we walk through it. With attention, with presence, with kindness, not only for others, but for ourselves. And if there's one truth Xiomara taught us, it's this. Aging isn't about losing who we are. It's about remembering how much we're still capable of becoming. So let's make these years, the ones we used to fear, the most meaningful ones yet. For them, for you, for all of us still here.